there are concerns that the administration could use its power and leverage to try to coerce other tech companies to now buy Intel chips.
We'll get back to your video shortly, but first, many of you right now will be watching the show on your phone, tablet or laptop, completely unaware that this very second someone could be accessing your device and stealing your data. Using the internet without private internet access, VPN, is like letting Facebook post your diary. Your friends and family can read all your dirty secrets. A virtual private network, or VPN for short, is an app that hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. It shields your digital life from those eyes who are looking to exploit your private information. Whenever you connect to the internet on a public Wi-Fi network at airports, coffee shops, friends' houses, or even at your own home, your data is at risk of being stolen. Your device is transmitting a great amount of information out into the open, which can be viewed by various different entities before reaching the intended website, such as your ISP, government sensors, advertising companies, and more. Hackers on the same network can easily steal your personal data. With PIA, you're protected. But there's more. With PIA, you can access all your usual streaming services, including Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney+, even if you're outside your own region. All you need to do is open the app, select a server from 91 countries, and just like that, you're digitally there. And it's not just for fun. With recent legislation, more and more content is being restricted. PIA allows you to access the content and news that you want to watch. And with one PIA subscription, you can protect an unlimited number of devices, so that's the whole family covered. Follow the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen now to receive a massive 86% discount, making it just £1.57 per month. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and to top it off, you'll receive 4 additional months for free. Head to piavpn.com now and take control of your digital life.
Lauren Goode, Senior Correspondent at Wired. Thank you for joining me on the Tech Report today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Trump has successfully purchased, is maybe not quite the right word, but acquired 10% stock in shares of Intel. Why is the simple question I want to ask.
Well, broadly speaking, this is part of an attempt to, build out and strengthen U.S. manufacturing, and specifically in the semiconductor space, which has, become a really critical part of national economies and also national security here in the U.S. Intel was at one time one of the leading chip makers, and now it has been struggling in recent years because demand for its chips have waned, and also companies have been a lot more interested in chips from, NVIDIA and AMD and the companies that make GPUs for AI versus the CPUs that Intel has traditionally made. And so because of the fact that Intel has been struggling, it was earmarked to receive billions of dollars from the 2022 CHIPS Act that was passed during the Biden administration. The Trump administration has now decided to take that and convert some of it into an equity stake in Intel and basically say, we're just going to give you these, additional billions of dollars and in exchange for stock in the company versus the CHIPS Act grant, which was a grant approved by Congress and had some strings attached. It came with milestones. Intel was only going to receive the remainder of that CHIPS Act funding if it hit certain milestones in terms of its fabrication plants and making chips and making advanced technology and that sort of thing. So now those strings are removed, but Intel gets a cash infusion that it may need, but the Trump administration gets a stake in the company, which we can talk about is highly unusual in some ways.
Yeah, I definitely do want to get onto that. What the purchase or the acquiring of these shares has been under the agreement that there'll be no board position and no voting a difference apart from select issues, apparently. What influence is this going to give the American government over private enterprise?
Yeah, it's such a big, thorny question. What's interesting about this is even folks who tend to be on the conservative side of the political aisle here in the United States have concerns about this because typically they believe in free market enterprise, for United States businesses. And this is something that veers more into, state-owned enterprise where the government is directly intervening with private corporations. It's different from something like the 2008 and subsequent bailouts that were given to the U.S. auto industries and some banks and insurers like AIG, because that was sort of a finite program it was under the Troubled Asset Relief Program. There were some bridge loans given, and the idea was that eventually those loans would be paid back. More recently, the Trump administration has been getting into something that feels more like direct intervention. A lot of folks are looking at something like the recent deal between Nippon, a Japanese steel company, and U.S. Steel in Pittsburgh, where the two are partnering, but the Trump administration approved the deal provided that there was a golden share or a certain provision given where the U.S. government can sort of direct some of U.S. Steel's business operations. In the case of Intel, the Trump administration is not getting voting shares in Intel, and it's assumed that it's not going to be able to meddle directly with the company's business, but there are concerns that the administration could use its power and leverage to try to coerce other tech companies to now buy Intel chips, to basically force customers, into Intel. Other chip makers are now also nervous because they don't know what it's going to mean for them. If they were originally recipients of CHIPS Act funding in 2022, if now the administration is going to turn its focus to them and say, well, we're going to try to take an equity stake in your companies now too, because the administration has indicated that it does plan to try to make more of these deals.
I might slightly overgeneralize this a bit in saying that this is approaching nationalization. Obviously, it's not taking full control of a company, but it is taking in part of a company and, yes, not having a direct say, but legislatively and more broadly, especially with Trump in the public sphere, being able to direct who will and won't get certain deals and certain investments and purchases. Is this something that Intel, they've warned that their foreign sales will be taking a hit? Is this something that they will be shifting towards more of a domestic focus and generally shifting away from foreign sales?
It's a really good question because nearly 75% of Intel sales are currently from abroad, from places like China and Singapore and Taiwan. And Intel has warned investors now that because of this investment, this direct investment from the US government, that it could be unsettling to those customers overseas who will be sensitive to geopolitical issues and what it could mean, if they place an order with Intel, but then the administration gets involved or indicates that for political reasons, it's unhappy with that deal. What happens? Will that foreign entity ultimately get its Intel chips? That's just as a hypothetical, but this is what, investors and also Intel partners are thinking about right now. And so it's reasonable to assume that because of this investment and because of the fact that there is such an emphasis now on US manufacturing, that Intel could be looking to, it's not only shoring up its domestic supply chain, but also maybe going to focus a little bit more on domestic customers. We obviously have a lot of tech companies here in the United States too that are in need of different kinds of chips. So it's possible that could be the case. But I think the two long-term questions to ask are, one, how does this really help Intel, in the short term and in the long term? And two, long term, does the government divest? Does it know when it's the right time to divest? Does it resist it? If Intel does really, really well and it gets back to a market leading position, then does the government decide, okay, we've got you there, and so we're stepping back now? Or if Intel, unfortunately does worse, or even, goes under, then what has this investment actually done for the American government and thereby for the American taxpayer?
So what would happen in the case that Intel does well, let's not say fully collapse, but it essentially just turns into, well, yeah, would it if it severely shrunk as a company, would Intel essentially just turn into a nationalized chip manufacturing plant company?
It's hard to say. There are a lot of people who want Intel to succeed, and for good reason. It's a critically important domestic chip maker here in the United States. And it's sort of one of the, stalwarts of Silicon Valley. So I think, people want Intel to succeed. Certainly, it's just hard to say what would happen if this investment backfires. And, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of not like lurking over that, but and hanging over that, of course, are these concerns about how, the U.S. leadership, U.S. democratic leadership, and even those who are firmly capitalistic and believe in free market enterprise have for a long time critiqued the Chinese state-owned enterprise model, where the government has direct involvement or meddles with, so-called private enterprise. And so, I think there are some very valid concerns right now about this stake in Intel, but also where the government is going to go from here, and could it meddle further?
If the goal is to secure American national security, then why is Trump investing so heavily in a chip industry which is so heavily reliant on Chinese rare earth minerals?
Right. Yeah, there are some inconsistencies in policy here that I think, analysts and the people who watch this space really closely, and certainly the chip makers themselves, are watching. An example of this is that Trump also recently applied a fee to NVIDIA and AMD, the makers of GPUs, if they want to be granted the licenses to sell some of their GPUs. These are custom GPUs that are made specifically for the China market. If they want to sell them into China and obtain the licenses to sell them into China, they have to pay a 15% fee to the US government. This was also kind of highly unusual. But ultimately, the idea was, well, as long as the US government is getting paid, that's fine. Ship your GPUs to China. And so that's happening concurrently, with domestic investments in companies, where the point is, well, let's lessen our reliance on China. Let's sort of reduce the ties we have to China. Ultimately, some of this, it's strategic, but also not very strategic. What it feels like here is it's a lot of deal making. It's somewhat opportunistic in some cases, and it's really hard to see what the long-term implications of this will be.
Lauren Goode, thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks so much, Isaac.